Talofa lava, maloelele, whakalofa lahi atu, and welcome to Our People, Your Stories, Tutala Mai, a new current affairs show brought to you by PMN News. I'm Agnes Tupou. Today we're looking at something everyone has a view on, the housing crisis, and how this is impacting Pacific communities. Housing and overcrowding is a major issue for our people. The figures? They tell their own story. Nearly 4 in 10 Pacific people are living in overcrowded houses. So how do we fix it? We took a trip to the heart of South Auckland, to Mangere, where Pacific peoples make up 60% of the population, and we drove around the area with John Kumitau, a Mangere local who works for Kainga Ora.
If you look at the people who live in Mangere, they're all Pacific Island and Maoris, meaning our people are renting. And those are the type of rent I've just mentioned to you. 900, 700 3-bedroom, mainly private homes, private houses. That's where the overcrowd is, not on state houses. It's based for me on professional opinion and knowing our community. Try and buy it, at least you own it.
We're joined in studio now with our guest, John Kumitau, a community public servant from Kainga Ora Mangere Development and a Mangere local for over 20 years. We also have Ronji Tanielu, a lawyer, principal analyst for Salvation Army, where his work focuses on homelessness and social housing. Firstly, I want to say thank you for joining us and being our first ever guest on Tutala Mai. Welcome, Malopito Mohiani.
Oh, thanks for having us, Agnes. And Agnes, can I just say that Mangere one is one of the biggest developments ever, or redevelopments ever in the history of New Zealand. You've got 10,000 houses that are being brought or built into this community. Hey, and that's a community I love. It's a community that's already stretched in resources, really struggling in some areas, some really real strengths in other areas. But this is a huge development. And if Kainga Ora or the government doesn't get this right, not just for the wider public, but for the locals of Mangere, that's the key. Because you can redevelop and just build houses, break down houses, but what you should be doing is trying to regenerate and revitalize a community rather than just building bricks and mortar kind of change. And that's a big thing that John's involved in with his work here.
Where are our Pasifika people sitting right now in the terms of social housing?
If you think of housing like a continuum from left to right, on this side here we have the sharper end of housing, so homelessness, transitional, emergency, so the real hard parts. That's where the majority of our people sit. On the other end, you've got home ownership, rental, and there's a big chunk of people sitting there, but unfortunately our Pasifika numbers are overrepresented in homelessness, overcrowding, and so on. I'll give you an example if that's all right. 4 in 10 Pasifika people live in an overcrowding situation. At the census last year, it was counted that there were 41,600 people, who were in severe housing deprivation. A quarter of those were Pasifika. Hey, so we're overrepresented in the dark, ugly part of that continuum. We're overrepresented there. If you look at home ownership on the other end of the continuum, there's only about 20% of Pasifika people that own their own house. So that's not a big number. 1 in 5 own their own house, and about 60% of people, of Pasifika people, are living in rental. Hey, so you can sort of see that we're overrepresented in the hard part, the sharper end, and our numbers aren't good in terms of where it comes to rental and home ownership.
You had mentioned, before I come to you, John, you mentioned overcrowding, right? That's one of the major issues for our Pacific people. How do we even get into those type of situations? Why are we ending up being so overcrowded?
Look, man, I grew up in the state house in Mangere too when we moved here from Samoa. We had about 30 people at home. That was sort of normal to us, eh? So we didn't know it was overcrowding until the government, the Palangis, told us it was overcrowding. So I think we get into that situation nowadays when there's desperation, when there's financial hardship, when you lose a tenancy in your rental, then you need to find a place to live. There's not enough social houses out there for you to go. So a whole bunch of reasons. One of the main reasons I'd say, Agnes, that we're seeing at the Salvation Army is through problem debt and financial hardship. So people just go into loan sharks. They don't have enough money to get by. They're using our food parcels. And so when you sort of get to that, the housing problems start building up from there. And then, hey, I think for Pasifika, we're not necessarily sleeping on the streets. Hey, there are Pasifika housing issues, extreme ones, are really around overcrowding and health issues that come out of that. So that's one of the reasons that leads to that, yeah.
And sticking with Mangere, right, the houses that have been built, though they are healthy and though they are warm, the feedback that has come back is that they don't actually cater for the size of our Pasifika families. What then is Kainga Ora doing that is different from what its predecessor, as in State Housing New Zealand? What's the difference? What is Kainga Ora doing now to change?
There are new houses we built. It's good for people who haven't seen them. They're big rooms. Yes, there are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rooms in order of standalone houses. There are little spaces. We are aware of that when we do the development. We work, the Kainga, the government, they'll come into the community and we share those. We let them know, hey, we need bigger rooms. We did, but there is a catch there, especially those who want to buy. Can we afford that? Yeah, I'll give you an example. In Māori itself, the homeowner, those who own homes, probably over the majority of homeowners in Māori, they are not our people. But if you look at the people living in Māori, they are Pacifica Māori people.
Correct me if I'm wrong, though, with those houses. Now, I live on that street, and I'm a proud citizen, I would say, of 275, yes, of Māngere. You've lived there over 20 years. I've only just lived there shy of 10 years. And the issue that I've seen is what Kainga Ora's come through. It was posed last year in the sense of about 30 one-bedroom homes were built and only round about 6 4-bedroom homes. Again, like I say, does it really cater to our people? Is this a gentrification that we're looking at? Ronji, what do you say to that?
Look, I think it is gentrification for sure. I've said it publicly, and I think some of it is gentrification by stealth. And gentrification is a $10 word. It really means that when sort of poorer people start being pushed out of a community. And I think that's been happening in Māngere for a long time. I will say this, and I will never defend the government. It's a supply issue. The problem is we just don't have enough houses. And so the government is trying to build houses according to the need. If you look at the social housing register, those who are waiting for a state house or a social house, about 13 to 15% of that register is Pacifica, but we only make up 8% of the country. Hey, so we're almost double our figures that are looking for a state house. You're right, the houses don't necessarily address some of the size of our Pacifica families, and that's something that the government has to respond to. I will acknowledge that there's some architects like Lamatone, who's another Māngere local who's working around typology, how do you get bigger houses, better spaces for our kinds of families, multi-generational families. So there is some work there, but I will say that one of the keys to stop this idea of gentrification is if locals own their own homes. And I'll always push for that. One of the things we're constantly going back to government is that Māngere locals should be able to afford a Māngere house. Porirua locals should be able to afford a Porirua house, not have to go further out in Pōkeno or other areas, but stay in the communities that their parents, their grandparents built, so that you're not destroying a community just in order to get housing.
John, is home ownership really the solution?
For me, I'll say yes. Even though we talk about long-term rental, but I don't support that. I'll support people to own their own home. We'll minimize a lot of issues of renting, maintenance, etc. And also, the good thing is if you own it, you'll look after it. You'll care for it. We'll minimize those maintenance if we're going to renting. And also, you own it. It's something that we'll dream of owning a home. And that's what I want our people to own a home and take ownership and then feel good. And for your family, for young people later on.
Are we asking our people to come and buy the 3-bedroom homes that are costing around about, I think, under Kiwi build, a $650K versus what the market price around about sitting about 1.2 million? Is that the pathway that we want our people to come and take?
Agnes, it depends on what people want. Do they really want to own it? What is in their mind? But for me, my opinion is, I will support them to own it. 1, 2, 3 bedroom, at least they own it. So how are we going to own it? Probably like families, they will get together, put their resources together. And if it's not enough, there was some other source of the government. Kainga Ora had another to support to make up the deposit of the house. But that's 650. That's the 3 bedroom for Kiwi build. People can afford to put together to get a deposit. For example, like sisters, brothers go together and like a share equity, share of the own. After 3 or 5 years, it's up to them to sell it. If a sister say, "Oh, sell mine," okay, fine. At least they own something. It's up to them to decide what you want to do with it, to sell it, and then we'll get a good deposit and move to an area where you'd love to go to. But at least you own something.
Look, I think home ownership is one of the solutions, but it's not the only solution. I think it's a good one. But right now, for the majority of our Pasifika people, home ownership is too far, because it's the houses that are being sold in Kaingaora, even with the changes in the housing policy and the caps, is still unaffordable for the majority of our Pasifika people. So your question is, how do you line this all up? You need the political will to line this all up. You need people that are going to cut through that BS red tape and actually get some solutions. The solution is, if home ownership is the question, then how do you get Pasifika people in a home ownership program that is going to support them, acknowledge cultural issues, acknowledge church issues, whatever, but work around a home ownership pathway. If it's about renting, and there's models overseas where you can have a long-term tenancy, long-term sustainable rents, then if that's the model, then get the supports around there. As much as I agree with John, the reality is the majority of our people aren't going to get to that home ownership stage yet.
Do we have an obsession with home ownership, and should we be looking more so to the long-term rental process for our Pasifika people?
Yeah, I think there is an obsession with home ownership. I think it's a good obsession in the sense that, as John said, there's benefits to owning your own home. There's a financial benefit, there's stability benefit, there's a community benefit. If you're part of a church, there's a connection to that local church. So there's huge benefits there. But I guess what I'm saying is, wherever the breakdown in the system is, or the area that we need to work on, that's where you need to wrap around the support. If it's a young couple that wants to do long-term renting, then what's the support, as John said, that you can wrap around there? But to be honest, we need to change our expectations a bit. Like, coming back to one of your earlier questions, we're not going to get those houses of the quarter-acre section with the 3-4 big bedroom. We're not going to get many of those houses anymore. One, they're unaffordable, and two, if you want to afford them, then they are in the outlying areas of Auckland. You know, so having those expectations, those realities that my family had when we moved here in the 80s, or the earlier generations, that's changed, and so we have to adapt to that as well.
We can have this talanoa, and this talanoa has been around for decades, about home ownership or long-term renting. What do you see moving forward, policies, developments, because we don't want to keep coming back to this conversation years later, right? You say there's a breakdown in the sector. Where specifically is that breakdown then? Have you actually seen it? I
think my response is the breakdown in the sector is that government thinks one size fits all, and they think that that Kaingaora is going to be the solution to all of these issues. They're a big part of the solution, maybe the problem, but also the solution. But you need a strong community housing sector. You need a strong Māori housing sector that's using papakainga. You need all of that solid stuff in the system to help families, especially our Māori and Pasifika families who don't have the income levels to quickly go into home ownership. I think in terms of policies, one of the biggest ones I think is that locals should be able to buy affordable homes in their local area. If you whakapapa back to Māngele, or you are born and raised, or you live there, schooled there, whatever that whakapapa is, that connection is, you should have the right to buy an affordable house before anyone else does. That would absolutely help stop gentrification, stop some of those challenges that we're seeing. And I think that's the kind of stuff that you need in terms of a strong community housing sector, strong home ownership programs if you're going to go that way, strong support programs, but you also need innovative policy like local houses for local people.
Ronji, to go off of that, as Pasifika, we're a village, right? So we know back in the day, our parents all bought a house because they all said, this is a legacy we want to leave you, right? So that you can get into the property market one day. How come we haven't seen it play out like that?
Yeah, I think part of it is houses are unaffordable. I think the market's absolutely changed, and I hope John can fix those affordable rates for KiwiBuild, because they're still unaffordable for the majority of Pasifika families. Practically though, I'd still, as John said, support home ownership as a pathway. It is an aspirational one, it's a good one, there's a whole bunch of benefits. If people want to get there, I think one of the best ways to do that is to make sure that your finances are in order. Start making sure that your KiwiSaver is being inputted in, that you've got a good KiwiSaver going. You can pull together some of your KiwiSavers to start buying a house together with family. Can I just warn you though that can create issues down in the future? Who gets this share? How much is the house worth? I've seen, as a lawyer, I've seen a lot of these issues play out in the last couple of years. So you need to be careful, buyer beware, but those are some of the practical solutions. I'd also recommend some of the shared equity programs that groups like the Housing Foundation have, that I think if families, Pacifica families can get into that. That's a really good way to support and help with your finances. And government itself has a brand new progressive home ownership scheme. So there's different options there, but really, I really like what John said. It depends on what do you want? What's the best fit for the need that you have? Is it rental? Is it get out of a state house? You need a private rental? Is it home ownership? And from there, building around what's the pathway from there. Ultimately, it comes back to getting your money in order. And you need to have people that you trust and support, whether they're a budgeter, a financial mentor, not some uncle that did school C maths 10 years ago and they know how to handle money. You need people that you trust because you're dealing with thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars here. So you need some of those practical steps to get your dollars, your budget in order.
With that, I want to say thank you very much, Malo Pito, for coming through and speaking with us today. I think I can summarize this that there is definitely a need for a shift in mindset and attitude towards home ownership. Realistically, we all know that it is tough, right? It is a tough housing market. But like you said, more talanoa, but yes, more action also needs to be done. So thank you very much for joining us here on Tutala Mai today. Thank you, Malo. For more on our stories and our people, please log on to pmnnews.co.nz. Until next week, I'm Agnes Tupou, Tutala Mai.